Peleliu, Pacific Theater, September 1945. Radar operators watched in horror as the B-24 Liberator, confirmed destroyed with all 8 crewmen dead and autopsied, appeared on their screens flying directly through the coordinates of its own burning wreckage. I am the War Maestro, and tonight I bring you a tale of men who fly beyond death, trapped in a purgatory of endless warfare where even complete obliteration cannot release them from their final mission. The Pacific Theater, 1945. The war with Japan was drawing to its bloody conclusion. While most Americans celebrated impending victory, pockets of fierce resistance remained scattered across remote island outposts. Peleliu was one such place, a forgotten hell of jagged coral, suffocating heat, and the lingering stench of death. Captain Warren Mitchell wiped sweat from his brow as he surveyed the twisted wreckage before him. The B-24 Liberator bomber had crashed just 3 days prior, its blackened skeleton now half submerged in the shallow waters off Peleliu's northern shore. The tropical sun beat down mercilessly as Mitchell's salvage team documented the crash site. "All crew confirmed deceased, sir," Lieutenant Davis reported, handing Mitchell a clipboard with 8 death certificates awaiting his signature. "Recovery team pulled the last 2 bodies out this morning." Mitchell nodded grimly. "Cause? Mechanical failure, best we can tell. Witnesses say the port engines caught fire during approach. Aircraft went down hard, no survivors possible." The wreckage told its own story: shattered plexiglass, twisted aluminum, the acrid smell of burnt hydraulic fluid still hanging in the air. Mitchell had seen dozens of crash sites during his years with 13th Air Force, but something about this one made the hair on his neck stand up. "Strange thing is," Davis continued, lowering his voice, "Tower says they received a distress call nearly 30 minutes after impact. Could be equipment malfunction, crossed wires, or operator error," Mitchell replied firmly. "Men are exhausted. Mistakes happen." As they turned to leave, a young technician came sprinting across the beach, waving frantically. "Captain, urgent message from HQ." Mitchell took the transcript, reading it twice before looking up at the clear blue sky. "Sir?" Davis questioned. "Radar station picked up an aircraft 20 minutes ago," Mitchell said slowly. "Matches the exact profile of our down B-24. Same tail number, same signature." "That's impossible," Davis whispered, turning to look at the shattered hulk behind them. "That's not all," Mitchell continued, his voice tight. "They're still tracking it. According to this, our ghost plane is circling the island right now." Mitchell's radio operator called out from their jeep. "Captain, we're picking up a transmission on the emergency band." The 3 men huddled around the crackling speaker as a voice emerged through waves of static. "Repeat, Dogwood 7-3 requesting emergency landing instructions. Running on fumes. Do you copy?" Mitchell felt his blood turn cold. Dogwood 7-3 was the call sign of the crashed B-24. The voice on the radio continued, perfectly clear despite the impossibility of its source. "Tower, this is Dogwood 7-3. We are experiencing engine trouble and require immediate landing clearance. Over." Davis looked at Mitchell, his face pale. "That's Lieutenant Cole's voice, the navigator." "Impossible," Mitchell whispered. "I identified his body myself yesterday." Peleliu held secrets that no military report could capture. The island had earned its nickname among Marines as the Forgotten Hell, a place where the line between the living and dead seemed thinner than anywhere else in the Pacific. Lieutenant Daniel Cole awakened with a jolt, his sheets soaked with sweat despite the rattling ceiling fan. The same nightmare again. He was back in his navigator's seat, watching as the ocean rushed up to meet them, the screams of his crew drowned out by failing engines. Except he hadn't been on that flight. He'd been reassigned to the salvage and recovery unit 2 weeks prior, a fact that made the vivid dreams all the more disturbing. Cole swung his legs over the side of his cot and checked his watch. So 3 hours. Through the open window of his quarters, the distant jungle seemed to pulse with unseen life. Many veterans of the Peleliu campaign refused to venture near certain ridges after dark, claiming they heard Japanese voices whispering from caves that official reports listed as cleared and secured. "You look like hell warmed over," Captain Reeves remarked as Cole entered the mess tent at dawn, dark circles prominent beneath his eyes. "Something about this place," Cole muttered, pouring coffee that tasted of metal and salt. "Can't shake the feeling we're being watched." Reeves nodded grimly. The boys at radar were spooked all night. That phantom bomber returned twice more after midnight. 3 different operators confirmed. "What did HQ say?" "That we're suffering from collective battle fatigue," Reeves snorted. "Ordered us to recalibrate all equipment and get some rest." A commotion outside drew their attention. A jeep skidded to a halt, and Mitchell jumped out, clutching a handful of papers. "New orders," he announced, his face unnaturally pale. "Cole, you're heading up a team to investigate the crash site again. The brass want detailed photographs, salvageable equipment inventoried." "Why?" Cole asked, noticing how Mitchell avoided his gaze. "Because," Mitchell hesitated, "they received a new distress call at 0217 hours. Emergency transmission on a classified frequency that wasn't disclosed to regular flight crews." "That's impossible," Cole replied automatically. "There's more," Mitchell continued, sliding a piece of paper across the table. The signal included coordinates to this location. Cole stared at the numbers, feeling his mouth go dry. They weren't pointing to the visible wreckage on the beach. They indicated a position 2 miles inland deep in Peleliu's notorious Bloody Nose Ridge, where over 10,000 men had died in some of the most brutal fighting of the Pacific Campaign. "The message?" Mitchell's voice faltered. "It was addressed specifically to you, Lieutenant Cole." Cole's 6-man team navigated the treacherous terrain of Bloody Nose Ridge with practiced precision. The ridge had earned its name through blood. Thousands of Marines and Japanese soldiers had died fighting for every inch of this coral hell. Even now, 8 months after the battle, the earth remained scorched and barren, refusing to reclaim the scars of war. "Jesus," Corporal Martinez whispered, stepping around a helmeted skull, partially embedded in hardened mud. "They said they cleared all the remains." "They lied," Sergeant Wilkins replied flatly. "Like they lied about a lot of things." Cole consulted his compass again, double-checking the coordinates that had supposedly come from a plane that no longer existed. The air felt different here, heavier, charged with something beyond humidity. Radio communication had deteriorated the moment they ascended the ridge, leaving them with only intermittent static punctuated by what sounded disturbingly like distant whispers. "We're close," Cole announced, his throat inexplicably dry, despite the canteen he'd drained minutes earlier. The coordinates led them to a narrow ravine that didn't appear on any of their maps. The limestone walls were blackened, as though subjected to intense heat. The ground was littered with spent cartridges, rotting equipment, and something else, aircraft debris that had no business being this far inland. "Sir," Private Fisher called out, crouching beside what was unmistakably a section of rudder bearing the distinctive olive drab paint and markings of an Army Air Forces bomber. "That's from a B-24, Cole confirmed, running his fingers along the aluminum skin, finding it cold to the touch despite the merciless sun overhead. "That's impossible," Wilkins stated, echoing Cole's own thoughts. "The wreckage is on the beach, 2 miles from here." Cole's attention was drawn to something half buried in the loose soil, a logbook, its leather cover scorched but largely intact. As he reached for it, the air was suddenly split by the unmistakable roar of aircraft engines passing directly overhead. 6 heads snapped upward simultaneously, but the sky remained empty. The sound, however, persisted, the distinctive drone of 4 Pratt and Whitney R-1830 engines, exactly the type that powered a B-24 Liberator. "Tell me you hear that," Cole demanded, watching his men's faces pale in confirmation. Fisher's radio crackled to life suddenly, emitting a burst of static followed by a crystal-clear transmission. "Navigator, heading. Navigator, do you copy?" Cole felt his blood freeze. The voice belonged to Captain James Harlow, the pilot of Dogwood 7-3, who had been positively identified among the charred remains recovered from the beach. "Sir," Martinez said, his voice trembling as he pointed to the logbook in Cole's hands. Cole looked down. The book had fallen open to the final entry, the handwriting unmistakably his own, though he had never written these words. September 15th, 1945, final approach to Peleliu. "Something's wrong. They're waiting for us. They've always been waiting." The sun was setting as Cole's team made their way back to base, each man unnaturally quiet, their eyes darting to shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Cole clutched the logbook, its presence burning against his side like a brand. Captain Mitchell was waiting when they returned, his face drawn with exhaustion. "3 more radar contacts while you were gone," he said without preamble. And HQ finally sent over the complete mission records for Dogwood 7-3. In the stuffy confines of the operations tent, Cole spread the documents across a map table. The official file revealed what Mitchell had hinted at earlier. The bomber and its crew had gone missing once before, vanishing during a return flight from a bombing run over Truck Lagoon 3 weeks before their fatal crash. "Says here they were declared MIA for 4 days, Cole murmured, scanning the yellowed papers. "Then they just reappeared." "Landed at Clark Field in the Philippines with full fuel tanks," Mitchell confirmed. "No explanation for their absence. Crew reported severe disorientation and memory loss. Medical evaluated them, found nothing physically wrong, but recommended psychiatric observation." Which was ignored, Cole concluded. It wasn't a question. With the war winding down, men and planes were still desperately needed. A functional crew and aircraft wouldn't be grounded for something as intangible as lost time. "There's more," Mitchell said, sliding a personnel file forward. After they returned from their 4-day disappearance, their next mission was aborted when their navigator became incapacitated mid-flight. Cole stared at the medical report. Lieutenant Daniel Cole experiencing severe disorientation, claiming to hear voices over radio frequencies, verified as inactive. Recommended 2 weeks recovery assignment. "That's impossible," Cole whispered. "I never flew with Dogwood 7-3. I've been with salvage and recovery since I arrived on Peleliu." "Check the date," Mitchell said quietly. The report was dated the 10th of September, 5 days before the fatal crash. "This has to be a mistake," Cole insisted, though doubt gnawed at him like shrapnel. "There must be another Daniel Cole." "I checked," Mitchell replied. "You're the only one in the 13th Air Force. And there's this." The final document was a crew manifest for Dogwood 7-3's last flight. 8 names were typed in neat columns, including Lieutenant Daniel Cole, navigator. But in the margin, handwritten in red ink, was a notation. "Lieutenant Cole replaced due to medical restriction. Replacement, Lieutenant Samuel Harper." Harper, the navigator, whose charred body Cole had helped identify from dental records. "The base adjutant found something else," Mitchell continued, his voice dropping. "The duty roster for tomorrow's patrols. It was typed up this afternoon." He pushed forward the final paper, and Cole felt the room tilt around him. There, listed as navigator for the morning patrol, was his own name alongside 7 others, all members of the crashed Dogwood 7-3. The night brought no relief from Peleliu's sweltering heat. Cole lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, the logbook open on his chest. He'd spent hours examining every page, finding entries dating back months, all in his handwriting, recording missions he had no memory of flying. At 02,000 hours, the barracks door creaked open. Private Fisher stood in the doorway, his silhouette unnaturally rigid. "Fisher?" "What is it?" The young soldier didn't respond, simply turning and walking away. Something about his movement seemed wrong, mechanical, like a marionette on strings. Cole followed him into the moonlit compound. The base was eerily silent. Even the usual nighttime sounds of the jungle had ceased. Ahead, Fisher walked with the same unnatural gait toward the airstrip.
"Fisher," Cole called out, but his voice seemed to die in the thick air.
As Cole rounded the operations building, he stopped cold. The entire salvage team, Martinez, Wilkins, and the others, stood in perfect formation on the tarmac. Their expressions were vacant, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. Captain Mitchell emerged from the shadows, his face drawn. "They've been like this for 20 minutes, he whispered. "Won't respond, won't move except to walk toward the airstrip. It's happening all over base, 12 men so far." A faint droning sound grew in the distance. Cole looked up to see navigation lights cutting through the night sky, approaching the island. "Radar has nothing," Mitchell continued, his voice cracking. "Tower sees it, but instruments show empty airspace. The Phantom aircraft circled once, then twice, each pass bringing it lower." Cole could make out the unmistakable silhouette of a B-24, its olive-drab fuselage gleaming impossibly in the moonlight, as though brand new. "This can't be happening," Mitchell muttered, but fell silent as the bomber lined up with the runway and touched down with impossible grace. Rolling to a stop 50 yards from where they stood, the propellers continued to spin, though no sound came from the engines now. The bomber sat on the tarmac, its metal skin catching moonlight like a predator's eyes. "The hatch," Cole whispered as the side door of the aircraft swung open. The men on the tarmac began to move in unison, walking in perfect formation toward the waiting bomber. Fisher was the first to reach it, climbing inside without hesitation. Cole lunged forward, grabbing Martinez by the arm. "Snap out of it."
Martinez turned slowly, his eyes finally focusing on Cole. "Navigator," he said in a voice that wasn't his own. "You're late for pre-flight check."
Cole released him, stumbling backward as Martinez joined the others boarding the Phantom aircraft. "We have to stop them," Cole told Mitchell, but the captain stood frozen, transfixed by the impossible scene. One by one, the men disappeared into the bomber. As the last one entered, the hatch began to close.
"Wait!" Cole shouted, racing toward the aircraft. He could reach it, the bomber began to taxi, picking up speed without a sound.
Cole watched helplessly as the B-24 lifted off, climbing into the night sky until its lights merged with the stars and vanished. Behind him, Mitchell's radio crackled to life. "Navigator, confirm our heading. Navigator." Dawn broke over Peleliu like a fever dream. Cole hadn't slept, spending the night with Mitchell and base command documenting the disappearances. 12 men vanished without trace, their footprints on the tarmac, ending abruptly halfway to where the Phantom B-24 had waited. "HQ thinks we've lost our minds," Colonel Harris growled, crushing a cigarette under his boot. "Ordered psychiatric evaluations for the entire base. Said the heat and isolation are causing mass hallucination." 67 witnesses saw that plane, Mitchell countered. It was real. Cole remained silent, thumbing through the recovered logbook. The final pages contained blank entries with only dates. Tomorrow's date was the last. "Search parties found nothing at Bloody Nose Ridge," Harris continued, "and no aircraft has been tracked leaving Peleliu airspace since yesterday's supply run." "With respect, sir," Cole finally spoke, "I request permission to examine the original crash site again." Harris fixed him with a hard stare. "Why?" "Because whatever's happening started there," Cole replied, meeting the colonel's gaze. "And I think it's completing a circle." An hour later, Cole stood alone on the beach where the B-24 had crashed. The wreckage remained undisturbed, a blackened skeleton half submerged in shallow water. The tide had receded, revealing more of the bomber's shattered frame. Something caught Cole's attention, a glint of metal near the cockpit section. Wading into the water, he found a dog tag chain tangled in the twisted aluminum. 8 tags hung from it, including one bearing his own name and serial number. "That's not possible," he whispered, clutching the impossible artifact. His radio crackled suddenly. "Lieutenant Cole, return to base immediately. We're tracking an inbound aircraft." "The Phantom bomber?" Cole asked, already running toward his jeep.
"Negative," came the reply, the operator's voice tense. It's Dogwood 7-3, the real one. Tower has visual confirmation. It's requesting emergency landing. Aircraft appears damaged but intact."
Cole froze. "That's impossible. I'm standing next to its wreckage right now." Static filled the channel then. "Navigator, confirm heading for final approach." The voice was Cole's own. He drove recklessly back to base, arriving as alarms blared across the compound. Personnel rushed to emergency positions while others stood transfixed, pointing skyward. There, banking into final approach, was a B-24 Liberator bearing the Dogwood 7-3 markings. Its fuselage was riddled with bullet holes, one engine smoking badly. It touched down hard, bouncing once before settling onto the runway. Cole pushed through the gathering crowd as the bomber taxied to a stop. The propellers slowed, then stilled. For long moments, nothing happened. No hatch opened. No crew emerged. "Check for survivors," Harris ordered a nearby medical team, who approached cautiously. As the medics reached the aircraft, the side hatch finally swung open. Cole felt his heart hammer against his ribs as a figure appeared in the doorway, a man wearing a navigator's uniform, his face obscured by shadow. The figure stepped into the sunlight, and Cole felt reality fracture around him. The navigator was Lieutenant Daniel Cole, his own face, his own uniform, down to the tear in the left sleeve. He'd gotten snagging it on a file cabinet that morning. Their eyes met across the tarmac, and Cole's doppelganger smiled with grim recognition before speaking into a handheld radio. "Navigator to pilot. The circle is complete. We've returned."
Night fell on Peleliu as military police established a perimeter around the impossible aircraft. No one had been permitted to board after Cole's doppelganger had retreated inside, pulling the hatch closed behind him. Armed guards stood at attention, their expressions tense as they watched the bomber that officially didn't exist.
Cole sat alone in the operations building, the logbook open before him. The final empty page seemed to taunt him, waiting to be filled. Colonel Harris had ordered him confined to quarters, convinced that Cole was somehow responsible for what many were now calling an elaborate hoax. Only Mitchell still believed him, and even he had begun to question his own sanity.
"They've requested a specialist team from Pearl Harbor," Mitchell informed him, entering with 2 cups of coffee. "Should arrive tomorrow to examine the aircraft."
"There won't be an aircraft tomorrow," Cole replied with certainty that surprised even himself. Shadows lengthened across the room as the sun dipped below the horizon. Cole felt a strange pulling sensation, as though invisible threads were tugging at his limbs, urging him toward the airfield. Mitchell noticed his distress. "What's wrong?"
"I need to go there," Cole whispered, rising to his feet. "I need to see inside."
"That's impossible. Harris has the place locked down tight."
But Cole was already moving, his body obeying impulses that bypassed conscious thought. Mitchell called after him, but his voice seemed to come from another world entirely.
The night air hummed with electricity as Cole approached the guarded perimeter. Strangely, the MPs didn't challenge him. Their eyes slid past him as though he were invisible. He walked directly through the checkpoint, approaching the silent bomber.
Its metal skin gleamed with an inner light that had nothing to do with the floodlights surrounding it. Up close, Cole could see that what had appeared to be bullet holes were actually tiers in reality itself, windows into absolute darkness.
The hatch swung open at his approach. Inside, 8 figures sat at their stations, the missing men from base. now dressed in flight gear, their movements mechanical as they performed pre-flight checks. In the navigator's seat sat his doppelganger, who turned to regard him with eyes that reflected nothing.
"You're late," his own voice said to him. Again.
"What is happening?" Cole demanded, fighting the vertigo that threatened to overwhelm him. "Time isn't linear in the air," his double replied. "Sometimes we fly into yesterday, sometimes tomorrow. The Japanese shot us down over Truck Lagoon 3 weeks ago. We've been trying to land ever since." "That's impossible," Cole whispered. "So is this conversation," his doppelganger replied with a terrible smile. "You need to take your seat, navigator. We're already airborne." Cole felt the floor shift beneath him. Looking out the nearest window, he saw not the tarmac of Peleliu, but open ocean thousands of feet below. The engines roared with impossible power. "We've been flying this mission forever," his double continued, rising from the navigator's seat. "But we needed you to complete the crew. The real you."
As though in a dream, Cole found himself moving toward the empty navigator's position. Star charts and plotting tools waited exactly as he would have arranged them. Everything felt horrifyingly familiar.
"Navigator, confirm our heading," called the pilot from the cockpit, a man Cole recognized as Captain Harlow, despite having only seen his charred remains.
Cole's hand moved to the radio transmitter of its own accord. "Navigator to pilot," he heard himself say. "Heading confirmed."
As he took his seat, his doppelganger smiled one last time before seeming to dissolve into shadow. Cole looked down at his plotting table to find the logbook open to its final page, in his own handwriting, freshly inscribed.
September 15, 1945. Final approach to Peleliu. Something's wrong. They're waiting for us. They've always been waiting. The bomber banked sharply toward Peleliu, which now lay below them once more. Cole felt reality shifting around him as the coast approached. They had always been flying. They would always be flying. "Navigator," the radio crackled. "Are we home yet?" The Phantom B-24 faded into legend, but the military archives tell a different story. Military archives confirm that a B-24 Liberator bomber designated Dogwood 73 did indeed crash off the coast of Peleliu in September 1945. Salvage operations recovered the remains of all 8 crewmen, their identities verified through dental records and personal effects. Strangely, declassified radar logs from Peleliu Naval Air Station contain multiple entries documenting an unidentified aircraft matching the profile of a B-24 bomber operating in the area for several days following the confirmed crash. These anomalies were officially attributed to equipment malfunction and operator error.
Even more puzzling are the duty rosters from the weeks following the incident. Personnel records indicate that several men, including a Lieutenant Daniel Cole, were listed as both Kia and active duty simultaneously. Military historians attribute this to the administrative confusion common during the final months of the Pacific Campaign.
In 1957, a Navy salvage team attempting to clear wartime debris from Peleliu's waters located the wreckage of Dogwood 73. Official reports note that while the bomber's fuselage displayed extensive damage consistent with a crash, the cockpit and navigator station were mysteriously intact, with all instruments apparently functional despite 12 years underwater. Perhaps most disturbing is a handwritten addendum discovered in 1994, attached to the original crash investigation. The note, written by Captain Warren Mitchell, states simply, "They fly every night. God help me. I can hear them calling for their navigator." The 8 crewmen of Dogwood 73 are buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu. Their graves remain undisturbed, though cemetery groundskeepers occasionally report hearing the distant drone of bomber engines in the pre-dawn hours, always from the eastern sky, always approaching, yet never arriving. If this tale from the War Maestro's archive left you checking your radar for phantom signals, take a moment to join our squadron. Make sure your dog tags are still cold to the touch, and subscribe to receive more declassified horrors from history's battlefields. Activate the notification bell. You'll want to know when our next mission briefing begins. Remember, some flight crews are still circling, eternally searching for their landing coordinates.